What do you use AI for? Write in the comments what you think about this. Enjoy the show. Story 1, I don't. Not because I have any issue with AI, but because I haven't found anything yet that it would be easier to do with it than without. And the few things that it could probably come up with a better solution, like Excel formulas, I actually enjoy doing by hand. Story 2, rubber ducking. AKA I write a load of code, it may not work or do quite what I wanted. And I'm like, hey, Copilot, what went wrong here? Can you see it? And it'll go, yay, dumbass, you missed that line X. Story 3. With the new ChatGPT app, I practice my Spanish and Japanese and get my grammar and pronunciation corrected. I hit the rate limit pretty quick, but it's just growing pains, considering local hosting. I also have an API project where I can text my server and query chat from home. IDK people are amused by the novelty. Story 4. I'm a solo artist, so I do everything myself. Writing, recording, mixing, art. Not being artistically inclined, I found it helps me out by describing what I'm looking for, and it brings that to life. Lyrically, it can help out if I'm stuck on a line or two. It's taken a lot of weight off of me. Story 5, assisting whenever I'm in doubt or just want to confirm something. Coding is something ChatGPT is really good at. So asking it, what's wrong with this code? It's supposed to do X, but it does Y instead. We'll have it look over the code, usually in under a second, depending on the code length, and find out what might be wrong. Unless there is only one thing that could be wrong, then it will tell you exactly what is wrong. Story 6. So far, I used it to make an outline, so I have some sense of direction on the paper I was writing. No, I did not have it write the essay, just generate ideas. And image generation for my D&D characters, because I'm a broke bitch and can't afford to commission anyone. Story 7. My career search. Optimize my resume based on the job description. Write a natural-sounding cover letter personalized for the job description based on my professional history, which it remembers from prior conversations. Help me determine the best type of job titles for me based on my education, experience, skills, and interests. My mental health. Assess my daily journal entries to identify cognitive distortions, perform behavioral chain analyses, have the AI take on the role of a cognitive behavioral therapist, and ask me questions based on the journal entry that could help identify strengths and weaknesses and anything else I might need to address. My life goals. Help me list out the qualities of my ideal life. Help me create lists of daily, weekly, and monthly tasks that would help me achieve that ideal life. I take all my AI interactions with a grain of salt. They're great for establishing a starting point, but you can't let them do all the work and just copy and paste. You have to take what the AI gives you and make it your own. Put it into your own words. Story 8. I use it to bounce ideas off. It's great at hearing my vague plan for what I want to do and getting enthusiastically on board, telling me what doesn't make sense and suggesting oddly inspired improvements. I have final veto on anything it puts out, but it's the refinement of ideas and objective analysis that helps move things forward for me so much. I suppose it's like an external brain. It's also great at coming up with puns. Story 9. I use it for funny scenarios that I don't feel like or lack the knowledge to, writing myself. I made some Left 4 Dead 2 dialogue with it where the Arvivors talk about their favorite topic, and all of them are fairly on character choices except Ellis, who always has surprisingly refined likes. I made one about music where Ellis reveals that he likes Chopin and goes into musical theory. Story 10. Large language models do more than 50% of my coding these days. I can't remember how it was possible for me to do what I do without them. It is like going from doing math with pen and paper to doing it with a calculator. I still need to do it and understand it, but it is way less work and more capabilities. One of my coworkers quit just when ChatGPT appeared, and we didn't hire a new coworker with me, and alms was enough for what both of us did. Story 11. Researching for programming. I can ask him direct questions to get some information and then continue my researching on YouTube. Last time I've asked him what pathfinding algorithms there are, he gave me some, and I've asked details about each one and ended up choosing the A** pathfinding algorithm. I then moved on YouTube to find a visualization, a video explanation, and a tutorial on how it works and how to write one. And before that, I was making a neuronal network with a genetic algorithm from scratch for a simulator I was making, and I've wanted to learn about more ways of training a neuronal network, so I've asked him for what others categories for training there are, and examples for algorithms on all categories. Awesome researching tool, better than Googling stuff most of the time. Story 12. I use ChatGPT to help make better prompts for Midjourney. I use Midjourney to help articulate my ideas into reality faster and better, then use an AI upscaler that is free that I found that works amazing. Throw the image into Photoshop, remove the black for transparency, and edit how I need. I see AI as a tool to help the creative process and save me time, TBH, because otherwise I tinker and waste lots of time messing around, LOL. I add text and whatnot myself, so it's not just AI in the end, and have been loving the results with lots of trial and error on mid-journey. Still a learning process, but I'm enjoying it. Story 13. Help with running TTRPGs as both a GM and player. Recently, as iPlayer, I've been using ChatGPT to give me meal and drink ideas for things I would be able to make in the Star Wars universe as a small fun role-playing aid since my character was the one doing most of the cooking. As a GM, I've used ChatGPT to help design monsters, encounters, and items, but everything it makes does require a fair amount of editing, and you have to be very specific about what it is you want it to help you build. Most of the time, I already have an idea for the monster stat block I want, but I need suggestions for extra abilities. Also, I like using slightly modified variants of NPCs. For example, I will ask ChatGPT to take the Town Guard stat block and make several variants with different weapons and slightly different abilities just for funsies. This shaves off some time from my game prep for D&D. Story 14. For work, I use it to write algorithms or small sections of code that I know what I wanted to do, but don't want to spend the time to implement manually. I work a lot with 3D and vector math, so it's nice for cranking out little bits of code. For example, I was working on some small tech demo using one of the apps we're building. I needed to do some basic pathfinding, so I gave ChatGPT the data models that I had and asked it to write a function to implement A-star algorithm with the inputs given. Maybe would have taken me a half hour or something to do on my own from memory, but ChatGPT can spit something out in 10 seconds. It's super useful to cut down on the time it takes to do busy work. Algorithm implementations, manually writing data serialization and deserializations, or just asking it for possible ways to do some logic is what it's really good for. My personal opinion is that in the current state, AI like this is really good for writing code that you already know how to write. If you use it for something that you don't understand, it's only going to cause more problems down the line when you don't understand what the code is doing and why. It can't write an entire program for you, but it can save tons of time with more basic things. I think it will make it more difficult for new programmers to get jobs, because for me it can essentially replace a lot of the work a junior engineer on my team might be given. I'll give it self-contained tasks that I don't want to do myself, and then it's up to me as the senior engineer to integrate those sections of code into the app as a whole. Story 15. C++ code for embedded applications. I worked R&D, and a lot of my work included writing whole new softwares from scratch for Linux, interfacing with UART, I2C, GPIO peripherals, and writing state machines to control program flow. I'd start asking ChatGPT for boilerplate interface, TX-RX code, and then keep adding modifiers over time, asking it to add more and more features until it turned into the final firmware itself, with only small modifications that I've had to do myself before compile. Story 16. I ask it to write project plan summaries if the topic is something wildly known and has tons of info available on the internet, like implementing a new CRM system. It does quite a good job and takes me about 25% of the time just to edit some of it instead of writing the whole thing myself. Story 17. A glorified search engine. It's like using a search engine, but much of the entire human collective knowledge goes into consideration at speeds which brains cannot comprehend. An example that sets AI as better than traditional search engines is that I could ask a multi-part question, use slang, and ask very specific ideas or concepts. Suddenly, within seconds, it will pop out a well-formulated and organized multi-part response with multiple options to choose from. Asking AI about concepts can be very good for figuring out something you can't quite think of. Vague descriptions will lead you to your answer. It feels like Akinator, except it guesses concepts and other complicated topics within no time. Story 18. I don't use AI for anything because I don't know how to. I've noticed my questions to Google have AI-generated responses now, or so it says. But that's about it. I read about ChatGPT often too, but IDK where to start, LOL. On the other hand, I don't necessarily need it for anything, I suppose. And the imagery generated doesn't intrigue me. It's too clusterfucked, and I'm tired of being rickrolled by fake AI shit peddled as real, legitimate. And I don't find out until I dig through the comments. That's where I have to draw a line. I'm not interested in being deceived. But if anyone wants to school me, I'm not impartial. Story 19. I found it to be pretty good at creating image references for background illustrations. Normally, I just go through a ton of photo references to figure stuff out, but AI gives me an extra boost to really narrow down exactly what kind of reference I want. When I draw an interior of, for example, a 1960s beach bum's shack under an amusement park pier, I would need a dozen or so photographs just to get started. I only need a few AI-generated images to get a conceptual grasp on the scene, because it'll merge so many different ideas and details to inspire other creative ideas. My actual drawing process hasn't changed. AI has just taken a lot of the unwanted chaff out of the previs reference gathering phase of an illustration. That being said, artists who actually let AI-generated imagery bleed into the final product are robbing themselves the satisfaction of their hard work, the journey of crafting it, and the infusing of their very identity into their drawing. Keep it as far away from the end result as possible. Story 20. My fiance's English is sometimes broken, so I tell her to write out what she's trying to convey in her mother tongue, and I use AI to translate it better than Google. Sometimes I use it as opposed to Google when I'm trying to find out niche answers, and it saves me from clicking a bunch of links that aren't entirely helpful. Story 21, just asking it all sorts of questions. Whatever comes to mind or comes up in a conversation, the answers are all there. It just finds them, summarizes, refines, and condenses all the more or less accurate information that's around into a valid answer. I wonder how all the crap and misinformation is filtered. Or maybe it isn't. After all, AI can only be as good as its source. And since the source is the internet, it's quite the miracle how it comes up with viable answers at all. Story 22, ChatGPT mostly, but also use Midjourney for online art selling. ChatGPT uses include emails, resume, cover letter, assignments, recipes, fantasy team selection, Vedic astrology research, ELI 5, therapy, studying complex subjects quickly, second opinions, even things like asking if I have dressed well for the occasion with its recent free photo attachment feature. I think ChatGPT has been like an intelligent friend I always wanted, who is always available, mostly. Story 23. This is so funny. I've been in student associations discussing AI stuff and often talk to family and friends about how amazing things might be when AI tech gets more accessible. However, now when the large language models are here, and some are even free to use, the most conservative parts of me must have been awoken. I don't use them at all. I'm almost a bit afraid, believing that when I start, I might not be able to stop. I did try some of the early text-to-image generators a couple of years back, but no, that's it, nothing more. Story 24, that's an extremely round question. Technically, I use AI all the time in video games since it controls the enemies, but I don't touch generative AI anymore. The big thing that's booming and currently crashing right now. Turns out it takes a ton of energy, like the same as a small country or a large city, and it also takes a crap ton of water for the cooling. Literally every single time you use it, a computer somewhere runs a load of processes. On top of that, most of what's available is either not actually very good for what it does, built on piles and piles of stolen work, or both. I did used to play around with character AI-type bots, but ever since I learned all that stuff, I just can't stomach it. I struggle to understand how other people can. A little funny RP or not having to do your paper just isn't worth that cost, you know? Story 25, resume, cover letter writing. Resume Genius is really good for this. You don't have to write the whole resume from scratch. You can enter your past positions and it will give you a bunch of different options for things you can put under that experience. You can modify it to make it more specific, accurate to your job. They give you templates. Some of them are good for if you have employment gaps, etc. The only thing that bites my ass about it is that sometimes you download the PDF and things go into the next page in a way that doesn't look professional, so you have to play around with it. Story 26, this. As the vibrant chaos in the Library of Alexandria escalates with high levels of laughing gas swirling about, hilariously flamboyant baboons skating and launching flames, and amorous bonobos tenderly frolicking in the midst of it all, the scene takes an even more outrageous turn with the unexpected arrival of Marcus Phoenix, the hardened soldier from Gears of War. Having somehow stumbled through a wormhole that defies both time and logic, Marcus arrives on the scene, his trusty lancer in hand, which hums with the promise of action. He surveys the bedlam around him, baboons zooming past on skates, scholars cackling in a gas-fueled haze, and gorillas exploding, causing bonobos to giggle uncontrollably. "What the hell is going on here?" Marcus mutters to himself, half bemused and half annoyed. Just then, a particularly overzealous baboon teeters past him, flamethrower in hand, roaring with laughter. Marcus shakes his head incredulously. "And you thought locusts were a problem?" In a moment of bizarre clarity, he sees a man in a toga, a supposed scholar, stumbling into the raging mayhem, laughter escaping from his lips as he attempts to make sense of the chaos. For reasons known only to the audience, Marcus decides this guy is the embodiment of all the madness around him. "Oh, he's getting sawed," he mumbles with a smirk. With a swift motion, Marcus revs the chainsaw embedded in the lancer, the roar echoing through the library. Scholars and baboons alike freeze, confusion mixing with amusement. The flamboyant bonobos watch, a mixture of wide-eyed curiosity and bubbling giggles on their faces. With exaggerated theatrics befitting the unfolding absurdity, Marcus strides forward, approaching the hapless, toga-clad man. The scholar, oblivious to the danger, simply stares up at him, still chuckling. "What's so funny?" The man slurs through his laughter, eyes wide. Without missing a beat, Marcus points the lancer toward him, revving it louder, and then playfully sways it back and forth. "Time to experience the art of the saw, buddy," he exclaims with a dramatic flair. The scholarly chuckles turn into shrieks of surprise as Marcus pretends to saw the air just inches from the man's toga, leaving everyone roaring with laughter. The bonobos, catching on, decide to join the act, prancing around and mimicking Marcus, dragging imaginary lancers, and pretending to saw everything in sight. The library becomes a stage for an impromptu comedy act that's both absurd and strangely mesmerizing. Just as Marcus is about to take it a step further, an explosion from a nearby silverback gorilla sends flaming debris flying into the air, and the laughing gas kicks in even stronger, creating a surreal, cartoonish haze. Marcus looks around, wondering if he's stumbled into some bizarre dream. "Well, at least this isn't the worst thing I've seen on a battlefield," he admits with a chuckle, a rare smile breaking his usually gruff exterior. The laughter in the library reaches a fever pitch with the chaos swirling around their festivities. Marcus at the center, brandishing his lancer while surrounded by giggling bonobos and onlookers caught in a whirlwind of joy and absurdity. It's a uniquely bizarre tableau where the lines of warfare, love, and laughter blur together into an unforgettable moment, one that will, quite literally, go down in history. Instead of the grimness of battle, the Library of Alexandria becomes a playground where chaos reigns supreme, laughter fills the air, and even a hardened warrior like Marcus Phoenix finds himself sharing a moment of comic relief amidst the pandemonium. And so the legend of that day is etched in time, a tale of joy, beauty, and unexpected friendships forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Story 27. Random questions that pop into my head while doing whatever on my PC. Helps a lot when there's puzzles/riddles/etc. in games. Also when a show mentions something I don't know about. As a recent example, I learned how much of a fuckboy Zeus was when his name came up in a show I was watching. Technically, I knew he was. I just didn't realize the extent of it. Man had something like 40 kids with many different women. Story 28. I use it for D&D stat blocks and or helping edit my custom monsters. I use it to help give me lists of names for taverns or inns, stores, NPCs. It's a lot less legwork when it can generate that stuff right away. I will give it a description of a magical item and have it output some additional ideas for me if I'm stumped. I also use it to look up grammar while I study Japanese. Some of the earlier versions were pretty bad, but some of the newer versions of ChatGPT are pretty good. 4.0 is fairly reliable, but I suspect as my grammar improves and I start using more complex sentences that might change. I try not to rely too heavily on it, since the research part is an important part of my learning, though. Story 29. I've used it for recipes, to fix my writing, for more accurate translations, to come up with sentence ideas, as Google alternative since it's way faster, to come up with unique jokes, poems, improve resumes, list goes on. I've even used it in my second language for writing. I also used it to come up with color palettes and explain the difference in subtle colors, since it seems to understand color theory. Story 30. I accidentally turned my car off while turning the steering wheel to the right, which, on my car, will lock the ignition in place and prevent you from turning the key at all. I Googled the make, model, and year of my car, and that the ignition wouldn't turn. And Google AI said if you turn the wheel all the way to whatever direction it was rotated in when I turned the car off, it would unlock the ignition, and I could then start my car normally. I probably could have figured that out with a few more minutes of reading internet forums or reading the instruction manual, but that definitely helped me out. That was the only time I found it useful, though. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it, be sure to write comments and share your stories.